Hello everybody and welcome to your newest lesson from the team here at fullskillsexamprep.com. Alright, so if you are getting ready for the ICCRC Full Skills Exam or the Entry to Practice exam, we are here to help. How are we going to do this today? Well, we've got a fantastic lesson lined up for you. Now, I know a lot of you are probably scared of PNPs, and I understand why. It's a huge topic. There's always tons of changes in PNPs. And if you're getting ready for the exam, well, it's a topic that might take you a lot of time. So one tip for you, of course, is if you have the test day data booklet, we've got you covered. We've got every single PNP in there, so you don't have to go through each individual website. If you come to the seminar, we talk about PNPs and strategies for dealing with PNPs. Well, today we're going to talk about one of those strategies, and that is understanding intent as it relates to PNPs. So I love this picture because you can see a person here, and she looks, I don't know, like she's thinking, right? And you can see all the different provinces. So it shows really the relationship, I think, between your future clients, between you, the RCIC or the RISIA, and of course, the various PNPs and what are the intent requirements for these. So for a lot of you, I know how busy you are if you're juggling work and kids and all of your other responsibilities, really. I'm going to give you, in the next slide here, I've got a 3-minute version of this lesson. So we'll talk about the main points, and then if that's enough for you, that's great. If you want to stick around and join us for the rest of the lesson, well, it's a little bit longer, but we'll go through everything really in detail. Okay, so as promised, here is the 3-minute version of this lesson. Now, of course, I recommend for you to go through the entire lesson, go through every page of the test day data booklet related to this, go through the simulations and the references, and really analyze all of those questions, and of course, join us for the seminar. But, hey, I've been there, and I know you're juggling a lot at the moment. So I'll give you the 3-minute version here, and I just spent 30 seconds talking. All right. So as you know, there's tons and tons and tons of PNPs. There's 60, more than 60 at the moment. All of those PNPs have various requirements. So you probably skimmed through quite a few of them. You know that there's various educational requirements. For an educational requirement, it's not just somebody with life experience in some ways, right? Instead, it has to be, of course, an education credential. Now, education credentials, if they're not from Canada, need an ECA. All right, so we have that requirement for almost every PNP has an educational requirement in there. Most of the people, of course, are from overseas and studied overseas in another country, so they would need an ECA. All right, people need not only to be able to function in a language, but they need to be able to prove this through language exam results. So we've talked about the various language exams quite a bit in other lessons. And of course, it's to give you a foundation to work across really all the different programs in Canadian immigration, especially, well, the economic programs, because almost every single one has a language requirement in it. And that language requirement needs to be proven, of course, by one of these 4 language exams. All right, we've got work experience. Now, work experience needs to be proven by the NOC and by documents. So what if I told you that there is another requirement that goes across the entire spectrum of PNPs? And actually, even Quebec has this requirement as well. So if you understand this requirement I'm going to talk about right now, you are covered for 10 to 20%, I would say, of every single PNP. What is this requirement? Well, if you saw the title of this video, you probably know already, and it is intent. So you can see this happy guy jumping up and down, and he's pointing at one of the provinces. Well, that's great because this is somebody who maybe applied for a PNP and is excited and happy and truly intends to reside in that province. So the trick I've got for you, because I only have 20 seconds left or 15 seconds left here, is to think of intent as being as important as language results, as educational credentials needed, work experience minimum requirements. the intent has to be seen as being as important as all of those. If a person does not have the intent to reside in the province, the person does not qualify for that program. Okay, so that, as promised, I did 3 minutes, just a tiny bit over 3 minutes with that. If you're going to stick around for the rest of the lesson, we're going to have a great time. We're going to explore this really more, and we're going to see this through examples, through the laws, and of course, we're going to really focus on how this can very easily incorporate into your exam success. All right, so if you're sticking around for the full lesson, good for you. Take that extra step, and it's going to be really nice talking to you for the remainder of this lesson. So we're going to look at intent and PNPs through 3 perspectives. And that is, of course, the first one is incredibly important, and it's what does the government say? What do the laws say about intent to reside when we are looking at PNPs? Now, the next one is incredibly important, and I think this person here, this lady, you can see she's got this ton of books in front of her, and I know you're probably in the same position, but if you're working through these videos, well, we're here to guide you and make sure that, of course, you prioritize your studies a bit more, especially if you're taking this seminar, because we'll do the individual study plan for you and, of course, really prioritize where you need to focus your time. Okay, well, how will this, or how can this play a role on my upcoming ICCRC exam? So we'll look at this very thoroughly through examples. I'm going to have some games for you as well, activities. And finally, at the end, I'll talk a little bit about business, because you're going to, if you're working through all these videos, if you're working through the all of the lessons that we have, if you're working through the material that we have, and maybe you joined the seminar, well, you're going to become an RCIC. You're right in the middle of all the steps right now, and it's important to think about the future, right? So I know when we do the seminars in person, people really appreciate it when I get to speak about business, because that's what you're going to be doing pretty soon. So probably even within the next 3 months, you might have your business up and running and ready to go. So how might intent and PNPs affect your business? I can tell you right now, it really does affect your business. You have to be very clear with your clients when you're discussing intent with them and PNPs. I'll tell you exactly how this affects our business and how we handle various situations that come up regarding intent and PNPs when we have clients who book us for consultations. All right, so let's take a look at the laws themselves to see how this pertains to the intent to reside in provinces when immigrating through a PNP. Okay, so obviously the best source of information for looking at laws is the IRPA regulations, right? So I think we all know this. Regulation 87 covers this really thoroughly. I think you've probably seen this before. But there's one particular part in Regulation 87 that really is about what we're talking about here, which is, of course, intent to reside. So I'll give you 20 little seconds to read through Regulation 87, as I have on the screen here, and then hopefully you find the section that's important to us. All right, if you found it, I think it's pretty straightforward, but it's incredibly important, and that is they intend to reside in the province that has nominated them. All right, so it's incredibly important to remember this. In the context of your exam, this is essential, even in the context of your life as an RCIC. So I'll talk about some experiences that I've had with PNPs and clients and that type of thing when we go to that section. And of course, for the exam, well, I think my experience is probably the same as a lot of RCICs, and the ICCRC, when they're looking at your exam, when they're organizing the exam for you, well, they want to make sure that if you're in these situations, you know how to conduct yourself. All right, so of course, we could see that Regulation 87 says that it's incredibly important that the foreign national intends to reside in the province that nominated them. Okay, we can see this in OP7B as well. So OP7B, if you have the chance to read it, it's a good one. It's about 10 pages long. It deals with PNPs and the procedures that people go through with PNPs. There are, of course, instructions for officers and that type of thing, but it's pretty helpful. A couple little pieces of information in it are a bit older, but really I think it's a good read, and it's only 10 pages long. So you can see the instructions even to the officers it is outlined again. It says the intention to reside in the nominating province should be reaffirmed in all cases. And I like that little note they have on the bottom as well, where they say this is especially important when it is anticipated that a significant time lag may occur between nomination and visa issuance. Now, if you work with PNPs, or maybe you immigrated through a PNP yourself, or you have friends going through the process, sometimes the process can take a little bit of time. And they wanted to cover this, of course, in the manual because, hey, life changes, people's plans change as well, of course. But this is something that's incredibly important, and that is, of course, to even though it might take a year between when a person's nominated to when a person obtains PR or shows up at the border and is ready to activate their PR, well, I mean, the plan has to be the same for that person. If the person applied for PR through a PNP, well, the person needs to, of course, intend to reside in that province. All right, so even though, of course, IRPA, the regulations are great sources of information for you to learn about immigration, well, the government website itself, I think, is great as well. So the IRCC website makes this information, I think, a little bit more presentable to the general public to read, right? Because sometimes you're going through an enforcement manual or you're going through something, and it can be pretty complicated. So I think this little section here of the IRCC website, I think, really shows you how important it is for a person to reside in the province or to intend to reside in the province all the way through the process. And of course, what happens if the officer is not convinced that the person intends to reside in that province. So when we take a look at that section of the website, and this is linked for you below the video, of course, if you want to take a look yourself. Well, they reiterate right at the beginning of that page of the website that they need to, of course, reaffirm that they're going to reside in the province that nominated them. And then you can see throughout this little section here, they talk about in the second paragraph that you can see here, well, what happens when a person shows up at the point of entry, or even inland as well. The instructions are just about the same. And they still intend to reside in that province. Well, perfect. So the officer has a great day. He's having a great time. He'll welcome that person home, and the person will begin their life in the province that nominated them. So that's perfect. That's exactly the type of client you want to have. That's the type of scenario in the exam you want to have. Does this always happen? Well, probably not, because there are quite a few descriptions of what happens when this is not the case. So you can see in the bold section there, in the third paragraph, individuals who indicate that they never intended or no longer intend to reside in the province will be denied PR. Okay, and then of course an Article 44 report means that the person is inadmissible. Okay, and then even for a person who shows up and they no longer intend, well, again, an Article 44 is inadmissibility because the person is not complying with the Act. And they give the specific section there, Regulation 87(2)(b), which we just saw previously, is intent to reside. Okay, and then they even get a little bit deeper in that final paragraph here, where we can look at Article 40. And Article 40, of course, deals with misrepresentation. So if the person is lying and pretending that they're going to live in a province, or maybe they just put it in the application, but they really intend to go to another province, well, it's against the IRPA regulations. For you as RCICs, we'll see how this plays a role in your life as RCICs, because there is, of course, an element of dealing with your customers. And dealing with your customers and giving proper advice, giving legal advice, and working with these laws, even when it's not so easy to look at, right? So we'll take a look at some of the tricky elements throughout this video, but really I think you could see the big picture here. And the big picture is a person applying for a provincial nomination needs to intend to reside in that province. All right, so that deals with the laws, and I wanted to just take an example from the Manitoba website. So the Manitoba PNP website is just an example of a provincial nomination program website. As you know, there are, I think it's about 60 different provincial nomination programs. And this is very common. So you can see in the Manitoba website, this one, we're just looking at one particular little program here, but they reiterate over and over and over again that a person, of course, needs to establish, or needs to intend to establish in that province if they're going to go through this program. So you can see that they're really looking at everything in here. I've highlighted the sections that really pertain to this. And it's interesting because half of the information in this section deals simply with a person looking to, as you can see, economically establish and settle permanently in Manitoba. All right, and as you look a little bit deeper into this, they're looking again at assessing the person to see if the PNP authorities would accept a person. And we can see that, again, right at the bottom, well, the person needs to, again, have a genuine, and I think that word is incredibly important in this, a genuine intention and ability to economically establish in Manitoba. So this is incredibly important, and I think I hear this quite a bit from RCICs, from the general public as well, where they'll say something along the lines of how can the government force a person to stay in a province? And you certainly do have a point. We're going to take a look at that as it pertains to the exam later on in the video here. But the intention, of course, that we can see from the government, from the federal government, from the provinces themselves, is when a person goes through a PNP, the province wants that person to intend to stay in the province, right? And that is incredibly important for us to really understand. So the provinces do not want people to, even though there are cases sometimes where people, a large number of people go through a certain provincial program and then move away right away, or they never land in that province, or they don't reside in that province at all. They're just using it to obtain PR status. We'll take a look at some of those examples later on. But really the intention of provincial programs isn't for someone to apply through a certain program because it's easier for them, or they qualify for that one and they don't qualify for other ones, and then go straight to Toronto or wherever people go. Instead, we can see that really the whole intention of these provincial programs is for people to go to these provinces. All right, so for a lot of you, you're probably wondering how this can play a role on your exam. Well, it's not just for the exam, it's for your life as RCICs. This area, intent, of course, will play a huge role in your life as RCICs. Now, it's an incredibly interesting topic because, of course, intent is something that can be a little bit difficult to prove. It can change as well, unlike something like a language exam score or a degree or work experience or something like that. So that is why we really focus on the ICCRC portion of this, because the ICCRC really deals in a large part with ethics, how to conduct yourself as an RCIC. So that is where we're going to tie in this topic for the next 20 minutes, I would say, is to look at intent. And we're looking at intent with PNPs, but really it could be intent for anything, and ethics for you as an RCIC. So we're going to see how this ties, of course, into your life as RCICs, how it ties into the exam, and later on in the video, I'll even give you some insight into how this affects myself and the company I work for as immigration consultants. Okay, so in terms of ethics, I think we know that we need to be ethical as RCICs, right? So the ICCRC Code of Ethics has several sections dealing with this. Now, Section 5.2 covers this pretty thoroughly, so it's the nature of competence. But being competent doesn't just mean being able to get results for your client or something like that, right? The section that's really important for us here is understanding and being able to interpret and apply laws, etc. So we saw the laws before, We saw them in one of the previous slides here. And I think we know now that the person has to intend to live in the province. If you're in a situation where the person is not intending to live in the province, but maybe they say that they are, well, obviously you need to be able to inform them that, of course, that's illegal. Now, in terms of course, you working with PNPs, again, you need to be competent in working with those PNPs. That's not just filling out the paperwork. That is, of course, recognizing if your client is a person who truly, genuinely intends to live in that province. Okay, and then we've got another section here. So Article 7 with the ICCRC Code of Ethics, where, of course, honesty and candor are required. You have to be honest with your clients. They should be honest with you. And this is something we'll talk about a little bit later, but if you have a client who is trying to, I call it scamming the system, because it is really, where if they say that they're going to, if they're applying for a certain PNP, because maybe that's one of the only ones that they qualify for, but they don't intend to live in that province, maybe they'll just land there and move to Toronto or Vancouver or Calgary or Montreal or somewhere else. Obviously, this person is not being honest with, their plan is to misrepresent themselves, of course, and they're not being honest with the government. They're probably not being honest with you as well. And if they are, of course, in a position where they want you to do something illegal, you have to withdraw. All right, so you have to be honest and candid when discussing with your clients, which means, of course, if someone presents this to you, if their plan is to go under a PNP, but they don't intend to live in that province, well, you have to tell them honestly that it's incredibly illegal. So you can see at the bottom as well, what happens if your client wants to do something illegal? Well, you've got all the steps right there. And remember, it's incredibly important for you to really become an expert in what you have to do as an RCIC, especially the Code of Ethics, in terms of the exam, in terms of your life as an RCIC. And I think this particular area, intent and PNPs, really, you see this in ethical dilemmas that you face as an RCIC. It's a great topic for scenarios on the exam as well, as we can see. And we're going to take a look at some scenarios that you might face in real life as an RCIC, some scenarios you might face on the exam, and we need to see if these are illegal, unethical, or not. Okay, so we need to think of the Canadian Charter as well. And this is a question that comes up all the time. I think you were probably wondering about this when you were working through the previous slides even. All right, so here's a common question that we get all the time. So when we do the seminars in Toronto or Calgary or online or here in Montreal, people always ask about this when we talk about PNPs. They'll say, okay, well, what business is it of the government to tell people they have to stay in a certain province? Because when we look at the Charter, well, people have mobility rights. When we look at IRPA, we look at the regulations, when we look at the PNPs, well, are they taking away these rights? And that's the big question, right? So the answer, I'm going to give you the simple answer here. There's a very, very complex answer, but for the sake of the exam, for the sake of your life as RCICs, this is really a summary of the answer. And that is, of course, a PR is a PR. Regardless of if that PR came to Canada under a PNP, if the PR came to Canada as a refugee, if the PR came to Canada as maybe a spousal sponsorship, the government cannot stop a PR from relocating to another province, obviously because of their mobility rights. But when we take a look at the person's application, when the person is applying, this is the big question here, and it's highlighted in yellow for you. We need to really take a look in depth at what was the true intent of this person when they applied for a provincial nomination. And when you look at the second half of that sentence, you could see that it says, and they indicated that they genuinely intended to settle in that province. So every PNP has a section, and we saw the Manitoba one previously, We're going to take a look at the Ontario, a section of the Ontario PNP website, the OIMP, in the next slide here. And we're going to see again that the provinces are very serious about this. When people apply, they need to demonstrate that they truly intend to live in that province. If they check off all those boxes and they put a note in there and put some of their proof in there that they truly intended to live in a certain province, but they really don't, obviously it's misrepresentation. Okay, so I've got this emphasized for you once more just because I really want us to make sure we are clear about this. We need to really emphasize on what the true intent of the person was when they applied for the PNP. So just to emphasize this again, we looked at the Manitoba Provincial Nominee Program website a little bit before with regard to this. We took a look at the federal website with this. This is just a small section from the OIMP website. And the point of this is to show you that this is something that goes across the entire spectrum of PNPs. So I know when you're looking at PNPs, they're difficult, right? And there's a ton of them. But something that goes across the entire spectrum of provincial nominee programs is the intent to reside in that province. So how can you prove this? How can you prove that you truly intend to reside in a province? If you're reading the court cases at the bottom of this video, you probably saw a couple of them where an officer rejected an application because the person maybe had family. Yeah, I'm thinking of one of the ones down there where the person had family in Vancouver. His kids were studying in Vancouver, but they were going to move to Montreal. So how can they prove that really they intend to live in Quebec and not in British Columbia? And how can you do this when you're, if you're an applicant overseas, how can you do this, right? Well, number one is just to tell the truth. It's simple. That's the way that we work with all of our clients on the immigration side. In terms of the exam, that's what you're looking for as well. And you can see telling the truth is, of course, incredibly important for everything. But you can see that you need to prove that this is the truth as well, right? So for Ontario, for example, they give quite a few options to people. And they tell people that you can prove that you have or that you had some Ontario experience before. If it's someone who is overseas who hasn't been to Ontario, well, you can look at the second bullet point there. Did the person apply for jobs in Ontario, have some interviews maybe through Skype or something like that? Education in Ontario would be someone who has been living in Ontario already, of course, and that shows ties as well to Ontario. If the person has not lived in Ontario, well, maybe they have plans to put their kids in school in Ontario. Maybe they've been in contact with some schools in a neighborhood that they want to live in. You need to prove all of this, of course. Volunteer work as well. So I know with some of the people who we've helped to immigrate, we always prove everything, really. It could be volunteer work with joining a baseball team or helping out with something around the neighborhood, or even playing sports and stuff like that as well. Well, all this counts, right? You need to have the documented proof of this. The fifth one here, the lease agreements. That's a pretty straightforward one to do as well. And it's something that you can start, of course, overseas. Professional networks and affiliations, where you're going to join one. So you'll join the ICCRC, of course. And if you, or for your clients, they might be engineers, they might be accountants or something like that as well. Well, maybe they'll have the opportunity to join kind of an accounting regulatory body or an accounting group or something like that. Family ties, social connections, personal relationships, previous visits. So anyways, there are lots and lots and lots of ways to demonstrate intention to reside in a province. And a little tip for you is if the person has some of these anyways in another province, well, you're going to have to make that case extra strong that they are actually going to reside, in this case, in Ontario. Okay, so I love activities. The feedback that we get from people who work through the videos is that you love the activities as well. Perfect. So I've got an activity for you. I'm going to show you some stories. We're going to work through them. And what we really need to focus on is who of these people, Alan, Bonnie, Chris, Devin, and Esme, has violated the intent to reside requirements of the PNP, or who will violate those requirements based on the information given. Now you're going to have 30 seconds to come to a decision. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be quite a bit of work, but really we need to think, of course, of the context of the exam. Remember, there's a huge countdown timer in front of the room in the exam. You're working through 140 questions quickly. And if you are joining us for the seminar, you know we do quite a few activities like this as well, just to get you really ready for the exam. All right, so, and why are we doing this? Well, with PNPs, as we've been discussing, the intent to reside is such a great topic. It goes across the whole spectrum of provincial nominee programs. And for all of you, if you understand what the question is really asking you, well, it's going to be an easy question for you to answer. So let's take a look at a few scenarios here. All right, so the first one is pretty straightforward, and you have about 25 seconds remaining. All right, so that's about all the time you'd have in the real exam as well. So I know it's quick. And you can see there's a lot of little pieces of information in here. We're just asking a quick question, though it would obviously depend on the answers provided to you. So if you're working through the exam simulations, so if you're working through our simulations, 1, 2, 3, the seminar simulation as well, well, you know that the answers provided to you, of course, can be tricky. But really what we're answering here is, has Alan violated the PNP intent to reside requirements? So let's take a look. All right, so we have, it starts off with a great story. And I think this is the type of client that you want, really, where he visited Winnipeg already. He loves it. So he's applying through the Manitoba PNP. Perfect. So the reasons are there. We saw that the intent is probably there. And then I think the second paragraph really demonstrates that this person had the intent to immigrate to Manitoba and took action on it. So when he arrived, he got an apartment, joined a sports team, began volunteering. Great. So that shows a person really had ties to the community that he immigrated to as he intended to. Perfect. Okay, and then 6 months later, he got a job. So you might be saying, oh yeah, but it took him 6 months to find a job. That doesn't really matter. There's not really a timeline on when a person needs to become economically established, although it certainly is something to take a look at. And he has a lower position than his previous position in, I would assume, in his country. So with this, it's a pretty common situation actually to happen with your clients as well, where you might have a client who's an accountant or an executive with a company in their country, and then they move to Canada and they start off with a lower position. So that's perfectly fine as well. And I would say this is a pretty, I don't know if it's typical, but a great PNP immigrant who went through the PNP process, intended to live in Winnipeg because he loved it or loves it. And when he got there, well, he established ties to the community, settled in. So it's really great. And then the big question, of course, has he violated the intent to reside requirements? You probably came up with the answer pretty quickly. And the answer is, of course, no. I mean, this is somebody who intended to live in the province, loved living in Winnipeg. It's winter now, so I'm not sure if he still loves it or not. And once he got there, well, he settled in. So it took him a little bit of time to find a job, but that's okay, right? So this one is, I think, a pretty clear no. We're going to get trickier and trickier as we move through Bonnie, Chris, Devin, and Esme's scenarios. All right, here's your next one with Bonnie. So again, I'll let you read through this, and all I need is a yes or no. All right, so with this question here, or this scenario, I like it because it has an RCIC in it. So this, of course, is extremely possible in the real exam, in the materials that we have as well, the simulation questions. Well, we have quite a few like this because you're looking at a certain situation, but you're looking at it through the perspective of an RCIC. So you can see we have Bonnie visited Jose, an RCIC, to explore her immigration options, and was disappointed when Jose stated that she only qualified for the PEI PNP. Now, this is a pretty common thing to happen in real life as well, is that someone will visit you and you do an assessment and you see if they qualify for anything. And the thing that they qualify for might not be the program that they want. Well, so right away, I think with this, you know that Jose should, anyways, because we're looking at PNP intent, well, you know that Jose should, of course, explain this to her pretty thoroughly, that if she applies for the PEI PNP, well, she has to live in PEI. She has to plan on living in PEI. So let's look at the next paragraph here, where Bonnie has always wanted to live in Toronto, so she tells Jose that she will apply for the PEI PNP and will land in PEI. Great, so good news to start, and it seems like maybe she has the proper intent. Well, let's continue on. Her plan is to visit the island after obtaining PR, but she will go to Toronto and find a job once her funds are too low to keep traveling. And here we say, uh-oh, because we have an issue. All right, so it seems like she wants to visit PEI, but not reside and live and work and get ties to the community and that type of thing there. So instead, it sounds like she wants to simply travel there. And when she runs out of money, she'll go to Toronto to get a job. So the question, will Bonnie violate the PEI intent to reside requirements? And I hope you got the same answer as I did here, which is yes. All right, let's look at Chris here. So you have 26 seconds remaining. All right, so I hope this was an easy one for you as well. You can see that we're getting more and more in-depth and a little bit more complicated. So we have Chris here. So he applied through the BC PNP and arrived in Vancouver 8 months ago to begin working as an accountant for ABC Banking. So we could see that this is someone who probably had a job offer, and that maybe helped his PR application, and well, he went to Vancouver to live. And you can see in the next paragraph, he's been doing really well with his job. So he has already received 2 promotions, and his newest job offer is as the district manager for Western Canada. So pretty incredible. If you have clients who go through something similar, you're very proud of them and very happy that you played a role in their success. Just like us here at Full Skills Exam Prep as well, when you pass your exam, we're always really happy to be part of your success. So let's carry on here with Chris. With this promotion, he will be required to move to Calgary, although he is happy in Vancouver. So this is where we get into a bit of an issue, right? The PNP intent to reside requirements. So if Chris takes this new position, will he violate the PNP intent to reside requirements? So with this one here, I hope you thought back to what we talked about before. I had it highlighted, I had it circled, I had an arrow pointing to it, and it was asking the question really, when Chris originally applied through the BC PNP in this case, did he truly intend to reside in that province? And the answer, even though the answer to that question is yes. The answer to if Chris takes this new position, will he violate the PNP intent to reside requirements? That answer is no. Okay, and we have Devin. So this one's a bit of a longer one, so I'll give you a couple extra seconds at the end. All right, so let's check out the story of Devin here. Okay, so Devin, and I'm reading this to you just because I know a lot of people listen to these videos when people say when they're driving or if they're doing some housework and that type of thing. So I'll just read it to you, just in case you're not sitting in front of the computer and able to read through this. Devin was accepted for PR under the New Brunswick PNP. Prior to landing in Moncton, he did not have time to research his new city and decided that he will figure out how to settle into his new life once he arrives. Okay, so right away you should be thinking that Devin's not going to have a good time with his immigration journey, right? So that's why even with your clients too in the future, you always make sure that they're researching things, and you can provide as much information and advice with this as possible, of course. I think it just makes your service more well-rounded. After landing in Moncton, Devin rented a room in an apartment for 1 month. He did not look for a job or long-term lodging in Moncton because he wasn't sure if he was going to live there or move to another city. So again, we have somebody who we're not too sure just yet about if he truly intended to live in the province when he applied. As we saw in the first paragraph, he didn't really research anything. He didn't try to make any arrangements before he arrived. And we could see even after he arrived, well, this person didn't really do anything, right? So he didn't try to get any ties to the province at all. Okay, so the third paragraph, finally, 1 month later, Devin bought a ticket to Montreal and is now working for a company on a 2-year contract. Okay, so we can see that he pretty much landed in Moncton, didn't really attempt to stay there, and went to Montreal a month later. So as Devin violated the PNP intent to reside requirements. And the answer, it's not a very clear yes, and that happens in the exam quite a bit. So of course it depends on the answers provided to you and which answer you should select. We talk about this in the seminar if you're joining us, but I would say probably. This person here, we have quite a few elements in here that lean us a little bit more towards yes, even though it's not really a definitive yes. One of the points I wanted to make with this story is that it's not enough for a person to simply land in a province and then move somewhere else. So that's not the intent to reside requirements, right? And even though, as we saw, the person is certainly covered under the charter and able to move, there's a lot of things you can do to make sure your client doesn't do this, and to make sure that your client doesn't think this is okay, because at any time, of course, theoretically, I mean, the government could look at the application again, look at how the person's doing. A lot of those provinces have requirements as well once a person's there, right? Where they have to do certain things or reside a certain amount of time in terms of, I mean, get a business going and stuff like that, and prove that they have a business in that province and that type of thing, right? So there are certainly some other little requirements within PNPs regarding this. But for Devin, it looks like he didn't really want to stay in Moncton, but he applied under that PNP for some reason, right? We don't really know from the story, but we could assume, or when you see something like this, it's often because the person didn't qualify for anything else. And moving to Montreal right away, maybe the person didn't qualify for any of the Quebec programs. Maybe he doesn't speak French, which we see sometimes with people who come see us as well. So maybe that was his plan all along, right? And with this, if that was his plan, well, he's obviously committed fraud and should receive an inadmissibility due to misrepresentation. And with the fact that he also landed in Moncton and didn't really attempt to do anything, it looks like, anyways, from the story. So anyways, we would say, yeah, probably he violated those intent to reside requirements. Okay, and I've got a longer one for you here to finish it up. So this one ties in a lot of elements. And again, I'll give you a few extra seconds to read through this one and give me a yes or a no. All right, let's see. So we have Esme. So Esme is the final person in this happy group of people. Some of these people won't be too happy if they don't meet those intent to reside requirements of their PNP. But let's take a look at Esme. So Esme, as you saw, has the story of an RCIC in there as well. And we tie in express entry with this PNP as well, because it's really important to make sure we understand how express entry and PNPs work together. So in the same way that I talked about how important it is to understand the intent to reside requirements because they play a role in every PNP, well, express entry as well. If you understand how express entry plays a role with PNPs, again, you understand maybe 10% of every single provincial nominee program. Okay, so Esme visited Ottawa recently on a business trip, and when she returned to the US, she immediately contacted Jorge, an RCIC, to see if there are immigration options for her. Jorge and Esme were happy to see that she meets the requirements of the Federal Skilled Worker Program perfectly, so they put together her profile in express entry. Okay, so with this, you're probably thinking of a couple things already. On the first one, she loved Ottawa, great, and she wants to move there. Okay, or move somewhere, anyways. Okay, so we see that she meets the requirements of the Federal Skilled Worker Program, so that should get you thinking a little bit, especially because we're looking at PNP, intent to reside. Now, if we'll see in the next paragraph that she didn't exceed the CRS cutoff score, so that's important to think of as well, right? Because for a person who exceeds the CRS cutoff score, so let's say she had 496 points. Well, she can go anywhere really in Canada. If she wants to go to Ottawa, she can. If she wants to go to Vancouver, she can. Halifax, anywhere, right? With the exception, of course, of Quebec. Well, when we take a look over here, we can see how CRS points play a role in this. So she's at 333. They don't mention if that exceeds the CRS cutoff score or not, but they give us, of course, the next bit of information, which is that she received an offer from one of the PNPs. Okay, and so that would provide her with an additional 600 CRS points, which of course exceeds that minimum cutoff score. Okay, so and then we've got this last little paragraph here, and this is where the role of the RCIC comes in. So Jorge explained to Esme that although she would love to move to Ottawa, there may not be an immigration option for her in that province, so it would be better for her instead to settle in Nova Scotia. Okay, now the reason that I put this in, especially at the end here, is because this happens all the time in your life as a consultant, in dealing with clients and explaining Regulation 87 and those PNP intent to reside requirements to clients. So this is where the confusion comes in with a lot of students and a lot of people getting ready for the ICCRC exam, is that intent is absolutely a requirement, but it's something that your client can change. So a language score, if a person's a CLB 7, sure, they could study and maybe study through EnglishExamPrep.com. That's our IELTS prep company. Maybe they could study through there and increase that score to a CLB 9. Great. Can you increase a language, educational credential? Sure. You can get more work experience? Sure. It takes time though, right? But the intent of a person, this is something that the RCIC can play a role in changing actually. So you can have a client in front of you, just like this situation, especially when we look at the fourth paragraph, where Esme wants to go to Ottawa. And Jorge explains that, well, there's probably not an immigration option for you to go to Ottawa. Would you prefer to go to Nova Scotia instead, because there's probably an immigration option there for you? Is this unethical? Is it illegal? And the answer is no, it's not unethical, it's not illegal. What Jorge is doing is explaining the options to Esme and explaining the legal requirements to her. So in this case, Jorge has not violated any requirements of his that he has to fulfill as a member of the ICCRC. And of course, he's not violated any regulations in the law or anything like that, and not advised Esme to break any of those regulations either. He was very straightforward, very candid, very honest with her in saying that and one of those key words, of course, is settle in Nova Scotia, not visit Nova Scotia and then move to Ottawa right away. as we saw in the previous example. Well, he's instead recommending for her to settle in Nova Scotia based on this provincial nomination. All right, so at the end, let's talk about business. So if you are a RCIA, well, you probably don't really have a business. You're working for a school, and that's great. If you are an RCIC, most RCICs actually start their own businesses. So how does this affect your business? So I'll talk about this just quickly, just to give you a little bit of insight again, because this is going to be your life. You're going to be working pretty soon. You're going to be working within, I would say 3 months, maybe 6 months. You're going to have your business up and running, and I hope that you have very successful clients. I hope your clients are happy with you. I hope you have a successful business, and I hope that understanding PNP intent to reside will be a pretty easy area for you to cover in your business, because it definitely will come up with clients. Okay, so these are the points I'm going to discuss here just for maybe 5 minutes or so. All right, so how might this affect my business once I become an RCIC? And you can see the first point, you need to educate people about Canadian laws. So you might have people, you have a lot of people actually who research on their own. And, you know, there's blogs and there's people and there's always somebody whose cousin's friend knows a guy who did this or whatever. And your clients will tell you these crazy stories, and you know what, a part of your job, I think a very large part of your job, is simply educating people about what is real and what's not. So educating people about Canadian laws is incredibly important. We get people who, so for example, even personally, when I have initial consultations, we're based in Montreal in Quebec here, and we often have people who will book a consultation because they want to immigrate to Quebec, they want to immigrate to Montreal, but they don't speak French. So there aren't really too many immigration options for people if they don't speak French, right? But then you'll go over the options, and maybe there's an option in Ontario, maybe even express entry, if maybe even the person exceeds the CRS cutoff score in express entry, and that's always a home run, right? But often those people just want to live in Montreal, and they say, well, how will the government know? Or what would happen? My friend did this, and that kind of thing, right? So you have to be really, really strict and tell them, listen, it's illegal. You can't do it. You might get, the outcome of this, of course, is being inadmissible. And of course, when you have something like that too, always put it in writing. Always send an email afterwards to make sure, because they might represent themselves and then still do this, right? So you make sure that you're not getting in trouble for this. If you have somebody who wants to use your services, of course, a lot of people just might join you for an initial consultation, and then they might try to do their own thing, right? But you might have people who want to use your services all the way through, and that's great if you do. What you need to do, of course, is really assess if they truly want to live in that province. If you have somebody who only qualifies for a program under the maybe Alberta PNP, and then the person keeps talking about Toronto and all that type of stuff. Well, part of your job, of course, is to really see if this person's being honest with you and really explain everything to them, that if they're applying under that Alberta PNP, well, they need to truly intend to reside in that province. Does that mean they have to live there forever? No. Does it mean that they need to plan to live there? Yes. Does it mean that they need to try to live there and establish ties to the community? Yes. Okay, and you can see the third point here. This happens quite often as well, where you'll have a discussion with someone, and they'll tell you that, oh, my cousin did it and it wasn't a problem. Why can't you just help me with this? You should help your clients. And for you, I mean, you say no. It's pretty simple. So they'll try to persuade you to do something illegal. And your job, of course, is just to really let them know that this is incredibly illegal. You obviously will have to withdraw from the case, as we saw in one of the previous slides right at the beginning of the lesson. You're going to have to withdraw from the case if they want you to do this. And don't be shy to do it. I mean, it's really important to be able to say no to clients and to be selective with who you want as your clients, of course. Does this cost you clients? As we can see in the fourth point here, you might lose customers. Yeah, you might lose paying customers, so people who might have paid you for this service. But it's okay. I mean, the type of person who wants to do something illegal and unethical and want you to help them with this, it's not the type of client that you want anyways, right? So if someone really insists on this and they tell you that they're going to have to go with someone else because they heard that their cousin's friend can do this type of work because he immigrated once or something, that's perfectly fine. I mean, you should be happy to lose a client like that if they're demanding these things of you already. If they've signed a retainer agreement already, what do you do? Well, you can withdraw from the case, right? You can take your fees from the fees for the amount of time that you worked on the case, I suppose. We don't. We would just, personally, we would just refund them and just kind of be finished with it so we can spend time with our clients who don't want to break the law. This is the part, if we look at the fifth point here, this is the part where it gets a bit, I don't know, I would say emotionally heavy, because sometimes you have people who only have that one PNP option, and maybe it's for somewhere they don't want to go to. So maybe it's for Nova Scotia or Manitoba, and they don't want to go there. They have to go to Toronto because they have a sister there and a cousin, and the cousin offered him a job and that type of thing, right? It's pretty difficult to be able to say no to these people because they might not have any other immigration options. But as you can see, the last point, you're an RCIC. You need to, of course, abide by Canada's immigration laws, abide by the ethics that you are required to have as a member of the ICCRC, and I would say the ethics that you should have as a Canadian even. So with this, we've seen that, of course, immigration law prohibits misrepresentation, of course. A form of misrepresentation is someone applying to a PNP and not truly intending to live there. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this lesson. It went on a little bit longer than I expected, I think, because it's a great topic. And it's certainly, I hope you could see the beauty of this really in that it ties across all of the PNPs really, and even Quebec as well. If a person applies for Quebec, well, the person has to truly intend to live in Quebec. So again, a very big thank you for tuning in. If you're going to join us for one of the seminars, I'll see you in person, of course. If you are going to work with one of our partners, it's very recommended. They are excellent. So EnglishExamPrep.com is an IELTS preparation service. I teach actually all the classes in there. So if you want your clients to learn how to pass the IELTS exam, well, go to the website and check it out and see if you like it. It's a similar teaching style to what we have with all of these videos. And if you feel that your clients can benefit from this, go ahead, send an email over there, and we have partnership packages for RCICs. So it would be, I think, a great opportunity for you to be able to diversify the services that you offer your clients. Of course, IDP IELTS is amazing, and they offer partnership opportunities for you as well, so including some marketing that you can do with them. You need to know, of course, where to send your clients when they need an IELTS exam. If you need your CPD courses, well, we're here to help you as well. It's a similar teaching style to this as well, and I teach some of the courses in there too. And work with an immigration lawyer, Andrew Carvajal, with the ones that we have been doing over the last couple of years, and the feedback is extremely positive, especially for new consultants. Finally, Scotiabank. So you're going to need your client account, you're going to need to organize your business account, and even if you just need business advice and that type of thing, Scotiabank is there to help you. So you can see on our website, of course, with our partners section, well, you could see Sante Tesolin's email address there. Send him an email, and he will definitely be happy to help you. It's the same bank that we use, and I find that they are just fantastic. All right, everybody. So I hope you are happy and excited, and you feel a step closer to passing the full skills exam. And I can't wait to welcome you as a member of the ICCRC once you pass the ICCRC Full Skills / Entry to Practice exam.